Hello, folks. Welcome back to another episode of Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast brought to you by Lettermen Row and our good friends at Buyers Auto. If you're buying an auto, go to Buyers Auto. That is what they tell me to say. I still don't like the fact that auto and auto rhymes with each other, but I didn't get asked to write a new tagline. Spencer Holbrook is on the other line with me as usual. Spencer, how are you this fine, beautiful Thursday?
I'm great. It's starting to feel like spring weather outside.
Spring has sprung, Spencer.
You said that in a story on Lettermen Row Thursday.
I didn't say Spencer in the story.
No, but you said spring has sprung. I was a little amused, a little disappointed.
But it has not actually sprung, if we're being true to, the solstice. That's not for a few more weeks. Anyway, Spencer, we're talking stuff about Ohio State football recruiting as we normally do. Midweek, Ohio State had two visitors on campus on Wednesday. One of them was local tight end Jack Pugh, who we talked about a little bit on Monday. And the other was Bowling Green, Kentucky athlete Jantzen Dunn, who Ohio State's recruiting as a defensive back. He visited back in November. The Buckeyes offered him on Wednesday, and I'm just going to say it right now. I think that Ohio State is the favorite to land Jantzen Dunn at this point over others like Oklahoma, Tennessee, Miami, Kentucky, Louisville, etc. So 6'2", 180 pounds. Jantzen Dunn is a player who, like Watts, has a lot of interest in Oklahoma. And I think that the fact that Watts flipped from Oklahoma ultimately is going to be one of the things that brings Ohio State to the forefront of the Dunn recruitment. We've talked a little bit about defensive backs in the class of 2021, but we have not mentioned Jantzen Dunn very much because the Buckeyes had not offered. But now that they have, Spencer, this looks like something that could happen. I don't want to say soon, but it does look like Ohio State is the team to beat here.
Yeah, and as long as he fits into the class and fits into what Ohio State wants, I think he could be I think on paper it looks like a good fit, but as long as he fits into what Ohio State wants and the plans, and it might shift a little bit moving forward of what they could do if they can land Jantzen Dunn, but he seems like a good enough player. I've seen some of the highlights. I've seen some of the film, and if you throw it on, you'll be pretty impressed.
Yeah, I mean, he fits the mold of what Ohio State looks for in the defensive backfield. We've talked about that. Long, 6'2", 180 pounds, as I said, and he's a guy who's the second-ranked player in Kentucky. Ohio State also is in the lead, according to most people in the know, for the top-ranked player in Kentucky, offensive lineman Jagger Burton. It's kind of crazy when you think about what Kentucky's done in Ohio in the last few years as far as shutting out Michigan State, fighting with Cincinnati and Luke Fickell. As good as the Wildcats program has become, and they've become a fairly good SEC team.
Consistent.
Ohio State is now the leader for the top two players in their state.
It's kind of what Ohio State does in Ohio. They take who they want, and then Kentucky and Michigan State, and every once in a while Michigan come in and get the scraps. Not really the scraps, but the leftovers, I guess, from what Ohio State doesn't take. I shouldn't say scraps. That's probably a bad word choice, but Ohio State may be able to do the same thing in Kentucky. If Kentucky prioritizes Ohio so much that they lose sight of what's in their own state, or Ohio State can capitalize on what's in Kentucky's home state, there's no reason not to do that, right?
Yeah, but the question is that really them losing focus in the state, or is it just underscoring and highlighting the difference between what a program like Ohio State is compared to a program like Kentucky? It's like the flip side of basketball, right? I mean, North Carolina, Kentucky, Kansas, those schools can go anywhere they want and get the players they want. But Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson can do that in football.
But, on the contrary, and we can just keep giving counterpoints to each other, like Justin Rogers chose Kentucky from Michigan,
right?
An offensive lineman. So it's proven that a 5-star talent will go to Kentucky. So it's not a forbidden place for these top-tier talents, and Kentucky can only get secondary players. Like, they just landed Justin Rogers. And so it kind of perplexes me that Ohio State is in the lead for these two guys because, Kentucky's done such a good job recruiting. And, there was just a bidding war for their top recruiter between Kentucky and Michigan State. Now they're paying $1 million to a tight ends coach. But it is interesting that Ohio State is having what looks like some early success in the 2021 class. And, of course, time will tell because these guys aren't committed. They're not signed. They have only taken a couple visits. And like I said, time will tell. But Ohio State seems to be doing well in Kentucky, and Kentucky seems to be doing well in Ohio. So it is an interesting dynamic that's going on right now between the bordering states.
I just think it's a matter of blue bloods and the difference between the historical programs like Ohio State, Bama, and now Clemson moving into that discussion with the decade they've had, that there are some teams that just aren't really restricted by borders. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I agree with that. And like I said, Justin Rogers is once in every 5 or 6 years going to a school like Kentucky, but it can happen.
He is, but I also think that was a matter of schools like Ohio State and Alabama didn't really want him to do what he wanted to do, which is play defensive tackle. And so you look at what
Yeah,
Kentucky offered him as far as the chance to do that, and it maybe made more sense.
yeah, and that's a pretty fair point that we probably should have brought up on the onset of this. But it is interesting. Like I said, Ohio State having some success down in Kentucky. Yeah, it's not known as fertile recruiting ground, but if you can find them, go ahead and grab them because they're probably going to be pretty good players if they've come from Kentucky and they've been able to have the kind of success that these two guys are having.
Well, Ohio State's been pretty active in the state in the last few years. They tried to get Rondale Moore, tried to get Wan'Dale Robinson, tried to get John Young. There's been a handful of guys from the state that they've missed out on. The offensive linemen in Kentucky have actually been choosing to go to Kentucky for the most part. So it is a sign that, Matt Barnes, who's handled that area for the Buckeyes on the recruiting trail, has really done a good job opening things up down there. And now Ryan Day and Greg Studwara have really sort of sealed the deal with Jagger Burton as far as just being involved in his recruitment, not stealing the deal as far as it being done. But the Buckeyes are at the top of the list for him and now for Jantzen Dunn. And again, I think the interesting thing with Jantzen Dunn is that we've talked about defensive backs like Ja'Kalen Johnson, like Tony Grimes, like Jordan Hancock, etc. We haven't mentioned Jantzen Dunn, and now here he is with an offer, and almost certainly at this point the Buckeyes are in the lead. And if that's the case, then maybe we start penciling him into the class potentially. But when you're dealing with out-of-state recruits, you maybe have a little bit more of a luxury when it comes to time before they want to make a decision. So I know the Buckeyes want to get Jantzen Dunn back on campus, and according to his father, Mitchell Dunn, who I talked to on Thursday, they're certainly figuring out how to make that happen in the near future.
And it appears that he's only going to continue to rise in the recruiting rankings. Right now, if you look at him, he's not a top 300 prospect in the 24/7 composite. He's the number 22 athlete in the country. Maybe a little bit of Cam Martinez there, where he just hasn't really truly been discovered as much as he probably should have.
Yeah.
I just think there's a lot of potential for him to continue to rise in this class and become maybe a top 200, maybe top 150 prospect. Especially if he commits to Ohio State, because
right.
you get that bump.
When you commit to Ohio State or Alabama or Clemson, you instantly move up generally. So
yeah.
Another player who visited Ohio State Wednesday was Jack Pugh, the tight end from Hilliard Bradley, as we talked about on Monday. I wasn't sure exactly how the impact of Cade Stover moving to tight end would affect the recruiting game. That's not going to change anything. The Buckeyes are still taking 2 tight ends in this class. Jack Pugh spent 6 hours on campus on Wednesday. Ohio State did not offer, as we suggested would not happen. They do want to see him camp and work out. I talked to his father, Dan Pugh, on Wednesday night, and the Buckeyes laid it out for him. I mean, the plan here is very similar to what it was for Joe Royer and Luke Lachey a year ago, which is, hey, if you are interested in earning this offer, you're going to need to do this. And as an Ohio guy myself, someone who grew up in Ohio and obviously would have dreamt of having the opportunity to play football for Ohio State, I would have leapt at that opportunity and waited the extra month or two, before committing or whatever, just if it meant I had a shot at playing for the Buckeyes. But that's not necessarily the case for kids today. And you look at Jack Pugh, his brother Trey plays at Northwestern, as I said the other day. There's not a lot of like immediate draw for a kid to say, hey, I have to go there. So he's visiting Michigan, Penn State, and Alabama in the next few weeks. And I think what you'll see is if any of those schools really, really push, that maybe he'll feel like the Buckeyes need to offer before he comes back to campus, as opposed to coming back to campus trying to earn the offer.
Yeah, it makes sense. He's a pretty talented kid, and he's right in Ohio State's backyard. I don't know. Maybe this is one of those things where Ohio State is just playing it the way they did last year with the tight ends. I think that's pretty sensible. And it worked out well for Ohio State the last time.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about in-state players, you just have to proceed differently. Ohio State believes wholeheartedly that Sam Hart, their current 2021 tight end commitment, is one of the best tight ends in the country, and that is not hyperbole. That is what they believe. He's a 3-star prospect, but they think at 6'5", 225 pounds, a state champion wrestler, that Sam Hart is the type of guy who's going to make a real difference. And so they're looking for a complementary player, and what they want is a tight end that maybe is a little bit bigger, a little more inline guy, and that's why they like a guy like Pugh at 6'5", 235 pounds. But again, they're not going to just offer a kid in the state of Ohio unless they know him very well, unless they're sure of what he brings to the table, because so many kids in Ohio, once you get the offer, will want to commit immediately. So they want to make darn sure that they know exactly what they're getting out of Jack Pugh, and that means seeing him work out, seeing him run routes. And that may or may not mean a camp visit, because he's so close that he could do that in May sometime in an evaluation period without being at a camp. So that could happen sort of without people knowing. But
It's a
the interesting thing, go ahead.
it's an interesting line Ohio State has to walk here when it comes to these in-state guys, because you don't want to offer them too early and then them not develop, and you have a commitment from a prospect who's just not up to par of Ohio State standards. But you also don't want to wait too long and then have them go visit Michigan and Penn State and Michigan State, and then they fall in love with one of those schools, and then you come in late and try and swoop them up, and it just doesn't work out. So it's an interesting
Yeah,
balance that they have to walk, and I think it's one that they're going to have to weigh in the next 2 or 3 months as they weigh their options with Jack Pugh.
when you're looking at Jack Pugh, this is a guy who, as I said, upcoming visits to Michigan, Penn State, and Alabama. There is an opportunity here for those schools to really push forward and make him feel like Ohio State is dropping the ball by not offering him. And Ohio State last year lost Ohio's best tight end, Caden Clark, to Alabama. So there is that opportunity there for the Crimson Tide to say, hey, they didn't go after this guy either, and look what happened. Penn State, Michigan, obviously, those are big time schools, but for a kid growing up in Columbus, you'd think Ohio State means a little bit more. His brother Trey had Michigan in his top 3 and final 3 schools when he picked Northwestern. So the family, despite the fact that they grew up Buckeyes fans, isn't like indebted to the school in any way or feel like they have to push the kids in that direction.
Yeah, and that's always an interesting thing too, is watching these kids from Columbus, especially in Ohio in general, but Columbus especially, try and weigh when Ohio State doesn't offer immediately, and whether to wait out that offer or commit somewhere else, or discuss intentions with Ohio State. It's just an interesting dynamic that's always fun to watch.
Yep. What is not fun to watch for Buckeye fans, but is our second favorite topic of stuff to talk
Is
on
it
Talking
Clemson?
Stuff, brought to you by our friends at Buyers Auto, is Clemson.
Oh, people
Ohio
love when we
State,
talk about Clemson too, Berm. They love it.
They do. They absolutely love it. 2 of Ohio State's top targets are heading to Clemson this weekend. That's Jalen Johnson, the 4-star cornerback from St. Louis, and Troy Stellato, the 4-star wide receiver from Fort Lauderdale. Both of them are visiting the Tigers this weekend, and everyone's going to panic.
Yes, that is 100% going to happen.
Here's the deal.
What's going to happen if they take a picture together?
I mean, it's cats and dogs, the world, raining fire, lots of bad things. The fact is, Troy Stellato and Jalen Johnson are both top Ohio State targets. They're both top Clemson targets. Ohio State and Clemson recruit against each other a lot, and it's going to be an interesting few weeks, because if Stellato and Johnson both make their way back to Ohio State at some point this month, as has been discussed, then you just don't know what happens. I think that Ohio State is in a winning position with both of them right now, but Clemson is a tough school to recruit against. The thing here, when you're talking about a kid from Fort Lauderdale and a kid from St. Louis, and this is what I've mentioned when it comes to Ohio State and Clemson in the past, does a kid from an area like Fort Lauderdale or an area like St. Louis want to go live in the country and the rural life of Clemson? And that ultimately is what this comes down to me, because you're looking at 2 players that are going to make an impact at any program they commit to. But what type of life do they want to live in the next 4 years? And that's where I think Ohio State and Clemson really differ. And maybe the plus here is for Ohio State in that regard.
Berm, I'm just going to put you on the spot. If you had a crystal ball right now, what's your feel on both of these guys right now?
Oh, man. I think Jalen Johnson is going to end up at Ohio State. And I think Troy Stellato, based on the length of the relationship with Brian Hartline and Keenan Bailey in Ohio State, I think that's where he ends up. It is certainly not a slam dunk on either count. I would feel better, I guess, on J.K. Johnson than I do Stellato, just because of Clemson's history of producing receivers, and the way that they run their offense is very attractive to young receivers. But I see a lot of Brian Hartline in Troy Stellato's game, and I think that that's something that Hartline has echoed to him, and that maybe that means something. I don't know. I know that this weekend is a big one when it comes to Ohio State's recruiting class in 2021, not just because Donovan Edwards is on campus at Ohio State on Friday, but because Troy Stellato and Ja'Kalen Johnson, who are two players Ohio State very much wants in the class of 2021, are at their biggest recruiting rival for the weekend.
It's so interesting to me when schools get into recruiting battles against Clemson, because Clemson is so hard to leave without a commitment. You saw it on their junior day. It's a very hard place to go and not want to commit. And I think that's going to be something to watch in the next few days. I'm not saying they're going to commit. I'm not saying that at all.
Showcasing what they can do for you at Clemson. And
yeah, I just think it's one of those places where
go ahead.
It's just one of those places where if you visit there, they're going to give you the red. They're going to give you the orange carpet, not the red carpet, and they're going to show you the slide and the facility and everything that comes with the facility, and you're going to fall in love. And it's one of those things where I think these prospects, and you can talk to them more on Bermanology about this. They have to have a little bit of self-control when it comes to going to Clemson and not wanting to commit. I just think it's a really attractive place for these guys.
It is, and there's a little bit more of a pressure push from Clemson and Dabo Swinney on their visits than Ohio State does on theirs. That's by design.
They've earned that.
It's like Penn State. Penn State's the same way. They like to really kind of push and try to get you to commit before you leave. It's easier to do so at Clemson because you know you're competing for national championships there, and so maybe, how do you get better than Clemson at this point? So really, it comes down to personality and preference as far as where you want to be. And if kids are not concerned about that geographic shift, then it makes sense for a lot of kids to commit to Clemson when they're there. They don't offer a lot of players at Clemson. They don't hard sell a lot of players at Clemson. So if they do, you know that you're someone they really want, and that's why it becomes so hard for kids to leave Clemson. If you're one of 3 or 4 players who are being recruited by that program at your position, and they're pushing for you to commit, you have an opportunity to play for a national championship every single year and get to the NFL, and why not? I don't blame kids for wanting to pull the trigger and lock in their spot in that class. And like I said, it's gonna be fascinating just to see how Ohio State counters that with 2 of their top targets this weekend, because this March is a pivotal month when it comes to building the class of 2021.
And again, it just goes back to what you always talk about, comfort and relationships. And if Ohio State has comfort with these kids and they have relationships with these kids, they have to be confident that these guys can go to Clemson and visit Clemson and not commit yet. And talk to Ohio State coaches about anything they have questions about with Ohio State in regards to comparing it to Clemson. You just have to trust your comfort and relationships, and I think Carr is going to play a huge role in both of these recruiting updates as they come in the next few months.
Yeah, and the reality here is this is why you don't put all your eggs in one basket. This is why Ohio State is still recruiting Emeka Egbuka, a 5-star wide receiver, the number 1 ranked receiver in the country, very hard, despite the fact that they think that they are in the lead for Troy Stellato. This is why you go out and offer a guy like Jantzen Dunn, just in case things fall through with Ja'Kalen Johnson. So you don't stop recruiting. You make sure these kids know that you're a priority for them and that they're a priority for you. And then you let the chips fall where they may. So, Spencer, let's get out of here on that note. That's going to be the end of this episode of Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast, brought to you by Lettermen Row and our good friends at Buyers Auto. If you're looking for an auto, go to Buyers Auto. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Spencer Holbrook. Thanks so much for watching, listening. Please rate, review. Let us know what you want to hear from us. We'll talk to you folks again next time. Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Letterman Live, we've got the practice report, we got rapid reaction. Hey, and we got Buckeye IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Berm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.